It was a warm Sunday morning. Too warm, honestly, for how tense my chest felt by the time I stepped onto the rooftop. The whole thing was supposed to be a networking brunch. Polished, breezy, just a light mixer for investors, early adopters, and founders tied to NovaCloud, a new startup I'd helped incubate last year. I'd been invited out of courtesy, really. Not because I was still involved day to day, but because I was one of the names. One of the guys they could point to and say he helped build the foundation. I was halfway through my first mimosa when I saw her. Abby, my wife still technically at that point. She looked good. Or rather, she looked like someone who wanted to be seen looking good. She wore a deep emerald blazer over a cream silk camisole, gold hoop earrings, and these nude heels I hadn't seen her wear in years. Her hair was straightened and tucked behind one ear, just enough to show off the expensive sheen of her makeup. She looked more like a magazine ad than the woman who used to sit on the couch with me, barefoot, eating cereal out of the box. And right next to her, his hand resting lightly and *mately on the small of her back, was Tom Bryson. Tom. Of all people. I froze. For maybe half a second. Not long, but long enough to lose control of the expression on my face. I hadn't seen him in months. Not since we wrapped up the final paperwork when I exited the leadership team at Hampton Digital. I kept my shares, of course. I'm not an idiot, but I'd wanted space, distance, peace. I thought we were done with each other. I thought wrong. Tom leaned in toward her and said something low enough that I couldn't hear, but whatever it was, it made her laugh in a way that didn't belong in that setting. It wasn't the kind of light, professional chuckle you give someone at a company event. It was closer to a giggle, soft, playful, familiar. When his eyes caught mine, his smirk curled slowly, deliberate. He'd seen me, and then he said, loudly enough for everyone at our table to hear, "Sometimes you have to take what someone else couldn't hold on to." People stopped mid-bite. Some looked up. Others looked down at their plates, pretending not to have heard. My fork hovered in the air. My jaw tensed. I didn't say a word. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a scene. Not here. Not with half the Bay Area's angel network watching. Abby didn't look at me. Not once. She just kept that same placid expression, like this was normal. Like nothing about this moment was fractured or humiliating. As if we were still just two professionals who happened to share a last name. "He's helping with presentations," she said finally, brushing her hand lightly against Tom's blazer sleeve. "It's part of the image." The image. That word lodged in my throat. Like everything, our marriage, our story, our entire past, was just a PR prop now. I nodded once. Calm. Controlled. Inside I felt like someone had yanked the air straight out of my lungs. But I held it together, because that's what I'd trained myself to do. You don't grow a startup from your garage to a multimillion-dollar acquisition without learning how to wear a calm face while your world is burning behind the scenes. They moved on toward the next cluster of guests, leaving behind a trail of perfume and carefully curated charm. One of the VCs across from me, an older guy named Howard I'd pitched to years ago, leaned in and gave me a half-apologetic glance. "You two still together?" he asked, too casually. I didn't answer. I just offered him a tight smile and said, "Not sure anymore." He grunted. "Messy," he muttered, turning his attention back to his phone. Just like that, I was alone again, sitting at a white-clothed table with my untouched avocado toast and a mimosa that suddenly tasted like metal. The worst part? I knew, or at least, part of me did. The weirdness hadn't started overnight. It had crept in slowly, like a leak behind drywall. Silent, spreading, easy to ignore until the paint started to bubble and peel. Abby had been drifting for months. She used to ask me to review her keynote slides, run through her talking points, even help pick the music for her videos. But lately, every time I offered, she'd wave me off. "Tom already gave notes," she'd say. Tom. That name again. It had started showing up in her sentences more and more. "Tom thinks this copy is sharper. Tom suggested I try a red lip for this one. Tom knows a guy at TechPulse who can get us coverage." It wasn't unusual for people in our circle to stay connected. Abby and Tom had worked together plenty before. He'd helped her launch her first UX bootcamp back when we were still living in that cramped apartment in Berkeley. I wasn't suspicious at first, just irritated, until it stopped being casual. She started dressing different, sharper, bolder, more like she was stepping into a photo shoot than heading to a pitch night. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous husband, especially not in our scene where power couples were a brand all their own. But her phone was always on silent. Her replies became colder, more transactional. She stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings. And now she was here, with him, at a public event, letting him whisper into her ear like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat there for a long time after they walked away, let the sun beat down on the back of my neck, watching the little pockets of people move from table to table, laughing, exchanging business cards, clinking glasses, like none of them had just watched my personal life implode in high def. Eventually, someone from the Nova Cloud team, a junior associate named Katie, came by and gave me a sympathetic smile. "You okay?" she asked gently. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." She hesitated, then touched my shoulder lightly. "We appreciate you being here. Really, you've done a lot for us." I nodded, but I couldn't speak, because all I could think about was this. Abby wasn't just cheating on me. She was erasing me, piece by piece. In boardrooms, in brunches, in whispers over cocktails. She wasn't just building a new story. She was building it with him. And I'd just become a footnote. They say hindsight is 20/20. But whoever coined that never had to sit with the sinking realization that your gut had been screaming at you for months, and you just kept telling it to shut up. After the brunch, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, running everything back in my head like a bad documentary. Not just what happened that morning, but all the little things that came before it. Things that didn't seem like much at the time. Things I brushed off because it was easier to believe I was overthinking than admit something real was cracking. The first shift started small. Abby stopped asking me to review her speeches. We used to sit on the couch with her laptop between us. Me editing her tone, cutting jargon, teasing her for saying innovative too many times. It was our thing. She'd roll her eyes, pretend to be annoyed, but she always listened. She said I helped her sharpen her delivery, that I made her sound like herself. Then one day she stopped asking. I caught her rehearsing in the guest room instead, door half closed. I poked my head in and joked, "Am I fired as editor-in-chief?" She smiled and said, "Tom's helping now, he's good with rhythm." Then shut the door like it was nothing. I laughed it off, but it stuck with me. Next came the wardrobe changes. Abby always had style, but lately it shifted. Less cozy, more calculated. Blazers with padded shoulders. Silk tops. Expensive heels. Not just at events, but for coffee runs, for dinner with friends, even for meetups she said were informal. I told myself she was evolving, owning her success, embracing confidence. That's what people do, right? They grow, rebrand. But something about it felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role someone else had written for her, and she didn't want me reading the script anymore. Then there was her phone, always on silent, always face down, always just out of reach. We used to share everything, grocery lists, passwords, dumb memes, but now even a text notification made her thumb twitch. If I glanced toward her screen, she'd tilt it away. One night I asked who she was texting so late, and she blinked like I'd accused her of something awful. "It's just work," she said. "You really don't have to monitor me like I'm a teenager." I apologized. God, I apologized. As if being curious about your spouse's late-night conversations made you the problem. That's when the gaslighting started. Slowly, expertly. Every time I noticed something, she had a way of flipping it around. She'd get defensive, not loud, just cold. Calm. Like I was insecure for even bringing it up. "Do you think I'd cheat on you?" she said once, leaning against the kitchen counter. "You really think I'd throw all this away?" I didn't answer, because that was the part that haunted me. I didn't think she would, or didn't want to believe she could. So instead of pushing back, I told myself I was being paranoid, that the tension in my chest was stress, that the distance between us was just a phase. I remember one night in particular, early spring. She came home late from a product meetup in Soma. Said the drinks ran long. I was still up, sitting on the couch, laptop closed, pretending to watch TV. She walked in smelling like gin and someone else's cologne. Something woodsy, too sharp to be anything I owned. I looked at her coat, which wasn't hers. It was navy wool with a men's cut. She caught my stare and said, "I got cold. Tom let me borrow it." Then tossed it on the hook and changed the subject. My brain flared. My heart wanted to ask why Tom was lending her his jacket, why she smelled like him, but my mouth just nodded. Because the alternative was worse. That's what people don't get about betrayal. It's not just about the act. It's about how much you help them do it by lying to yourself. I tell myself she was busy, that the startup scene was consuming, that founders work weird hours, that maybe we were just going through a lull. Every couple hits those, right? You coast. You recalibrate. But even the way she hugged me had changed. It used to be full-bodied. Real. The kind of embrace where you feel someone melt a little in your arms. Lately it felt like she was hugging a cousin at a funeral. Short, polite, obligatory, and the eye contact, gone. She looked through me, or around me, or at her phone. Sometimes I caught her smiling at texts. Subtle. A twitch of her lip. Not the kind of smile you give your coworkers. And definitely not the kind you give your husband when he asks how your day was and you say fine before going back to Slack. Tom started showing up more and more, not physically at first but in stories. In her tone. Her references. Tom said this. Tom thinks that. Tom knows someone who. Like he'd taken the place in her mind I used to occupy. I told myself it was a professional connection. That they were collaborating. That it was just business. But then I started noticing the absences. Emotional ones. She stopped asking about my work. Stopped listening when I talked about new ideas. When I landed a new consulting gig, she barely reacted. Just said cool and went back to typing. No hug. No celebration. Just indifference. We used to do Sunday hikes. Weekend coffee walks. Dinner on the patio. All of it vanished. I'd ask if she wanted to go out and she'd say she was tired, burned out, overstimulated, needed rest. But somehow she always had energy for the next panel event, for the new co-working mixer, for Tom. I remember sitting alone on the back porch one evening, a bottle of wine open, waiting for her to come home. I'd made dinner, real food, chicken, roasted vegetables, that sourdough she loved. But she texted at 7:42 saying she was staying late to brainstorm with the team. She came home at 11:15. No apology. No explanation. Just a comment about how draining innovation culture had become. I nodded, then scraped her plate into the trash. Even the dog started noticing. Abby used to be his favorite. He'd follow her around the house, tail wagging. But now, whenever she walked in, he'd hesitate. Stay curled by my feet. Animals know things. They smell energy. They feel absence. And still, I said nothing, because the alternative, that she was cheating, felt too devastating to look at directly. It was like staring at the sun. So I squinted, looked away, tried to see shadows instead of fire. I started Googling things in private. Signs your spouse is emotionally checked out. Micro-cheating behaviors. Is emotional infidelity real? I read articles at 2 a.m. like they were sacred texts, highlighting symptoms, comparing case studies, looking for some kind of answer that didn't end in heartbreak. But no matter how I spun it, the pieces fit together. Perfectly, painfully. Abby was gone. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, spiritually, *mately, she was elsewhere. Her body came home, but her mind stayed with him, wherever he was, wherever they were building their little second life. And still, I told myself maybe it was a phase, until brunch made it official, until Tom's smirk burned itself into my brain like a signature, until she said, "It's part of the image," like I was the fool for not seeing the performance earlier. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. I just hadn't wanted to see it. But now I couldn't unsee anything. And the truth, sharp, cold, and absolutely undeniable, was this: she'd already left me. She just hadn't packed her bags yet. The thing about truth is, once it starts knocking, it doesn't stop. You can ignore it, delay it, pretend it's just the wind rattling your windows, but eventually, it finds a way in. And when it does, it doesn't whisper. It screams. For weeks, I told myself I didn't want to know for sure, that what I suspected was enough, that confronting it would break something I might not be able to rebuild. But after that brunch, after that smirk, that hand on her waist, that line, sometimes you have to take what someone else couldn't hold on to. I knew I couldn't live in denial anymore. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to know what was real. So I made a choice. That night, after Abby had gone to bed early claiming she had a pitch rehearsal the next morning, I went down to the garage and pulled out the drone. It was a gift I'd bought for myself months ago. Top-of-the-line, high-resolution camera, GPS navigation, stabilized lens. I used it once to get aerial footage of a property I was consulting on. Since then, it had sat untouched in its case. Until now. Abby had told me she was staying at a friend's lake house the next evening. Just a girl's weekend, she said, to clear her head. A break from the grind. She kissed me on the cheek as she said it, like that made it believable. Like she still remembered how to make that gesture mean something. But I knew the house. I owned the house. Or I had. We'd leased it to Tom's company for a retreat a while back. He'd asked if they could use it again, for offsites. I'd forgotten about the renewal. Turns out he hadn't. I checked the security registration. Still listed under my name. Still active. Still in my control. And so, when Abby left the next afternoon with her suitcase and vague promises to check in later, I waited an hour. Then I launched the drone. It wasn't some cinematic thing. No dramatic music. No swirling wind. Just a quiet whir as the propellers kicked up dust in the driveway and lifted into the sky. I used my phone to guide it toward the lake. Toward the house. Part of me prayed I wouldn't see anything. That I'd find an empty deck. A peaceful shoreline. Maybe even just her and her girlfriends sipping wine and laughing at me for being suspicious. But when the camera feed locked in, the first thing I saw was Abby. On the balcony. Wrapped in Tom's arms. She was wearing a hoodie I didn't recognize. Legs curled under her like she lived there. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. She laughed, really laughed, and rested her head against his chest. I didn't feel rage. Not right then. I felt nothing. Just silence. Like my body had gone offline and was waiting for a reboot. They stood like that for a while. Then disappeared inside. The camera kept rolling. 3 minutes later, the upstairs bedroom light turned on. I didn't zoom in. I didn't need to. I wasn't trying to be a voyeur. I wasn't trying to catch them in the act. I just needed to see. To confirm what my gut had been telling me for months. They were together. Really together. Not just emotionally. Not just secretly. But physically. Romantically. And mately. Living in the space between lies and logistics. When I landed the drone back at the house, I didn't feel like crying. Or shouting. I just sat there in the garage, holding the controller like it was the weight of everything I just lost. Eventually, I went inside. Pulled up the digital lease agreement for the lake house. Sure enough, still in my name. Still mine. I opened a fresh document and drafted a notice to terminate the lease. Effective immediately. No warning. No extension. Just a polite but firm reminder. Premises use agreement revoked due to conflict of interest. All occupants must vacate within 48 hours. Then I attached a copy of the title deed, highlighted my signature, and emailed it directly to Tom's company address. No words in the body of the email. Just one line in the subject. Without her, you can't even afford the roof. I hit send. Then I powered everything down, walked upstairs and went to bed. Alone. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about pride. It was about clarity. About reclaiming what was mine. Even if it was just property, just pixels, just a scrap of dignity. The next morning, Abby texted me a picture of a sunrise over the lake. Like nothing had changed. like I hadn't seen her wrapped around another man in the house we used to call ours. "Hope you're having a good morning too," she wrote. "Miss you." I stared at it for a long time, then turned off read receipts. That evening, she called, said something about the lease being terminated suddenly, and asked if I knew anything about it. I said, "Nope, sounds like poor planning on their end." She hesitated. "Tom said." I cut her off. "I don't care what Tom said." Silence. Then, "Can we talk when I get back?" "Sure," I said, and hung up. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to plead. I didn't want her to know yet what I knew, because I had already shifted from reaction to strategy. She had spent months building an illusion. Now it was my turn to build a reality, one she wouldn't see coming. While she packed her bags at the lake house and pretended to be caught off guard by a lease that was never hers, I met with Allison, my lawyer. Allison and I go back over a decade. She helped draft Hampton Digital's original founder agreements. Sharp as a scalpel, cool under pressure, and loyal in the way only people who've watched you build from nothing can be. When I told her what happened, she didn't flinch. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "I have more than proof," I said, sliding the flash drive across the table. "Good," she said, "because you're about to play a longer game." And just like that, everything shifted. I wasn't just a betrayed husband anymore. I was a shareholder, a silent partner, a man with leverage. And Tom? Tom wasn't just a thief of hearts. He was a liability. The drone footage, the texts, the call logs, the sudden professional access Abby had given him. It all painted a picture. One that mattered to investors, to boards, to stakeholders who didn't like mess. The next few days were quiet, almost eerily so. Abby returned from the lake house and acted like she'd just been on vacation. She brought me a mug, a stupid little souvenir with the words, "Disconnect to reconnect," printed on it. I didn't even unwrap it. Instead, I told her I needed space. She didn't argue. Maybe she thought she'd won already, that I was too broken to fight back. But what she didn't realize, what neither of them realized, was that I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. Every step, every move, every word, calculated. Because now I didn't just want the truth. I wanted consequences. And for the first time in weeks, I finally felt in control. People think betrayal breaks you instantly, like a plate dropped on tile. But really, it's slower. It's a steady cracking, a splintering that crawls through your ribs until one day you wake up and realize you're not broken. You're hollow. And hollow is dangerous because hollow makes room for strategy. After Abby came back from the lake house, pretending she had no idea why the lease had been revoked, something inside me settled. Not peace, never peace, but certainty. Cold, clean certainty. The kind that steadies your hands and quiets the noise in your head. I stopped reacting, stopped questioning, stopped asking why she smelled like someone else's cologne or why she angled her phone away from me. I let her believe I was pulling inward, licking wounds she assumed were still bleeding. But I wasn't bleeding anymore. I was planning. The morning after she returned, I drove across town to meet Allison, my old lawyer and the only person who knew exactly how much of Hampton Digital I still controlled. She greeted me with that calm, measured smile she always had, like nothing in the world could surprise her anymore. "You look like a man who finally decided to stop playing defense," she said, sliding a mug of coffee toward me. "I need your help," I told her. Quietly. Those are my favorite kinds of projects. I took out the flash drive, the drone footage, the call logs, the timeline I'd reconstructed, every breadcrumb. To her credit, she didn't gasp or flinch. She just nodded like she had expected this from the moment I called. "This," she said, tapping the drive, "is more than enough to invoke Clause 14. Clause 14. Most people never read all the obscure clauses in their founding documents. But I did, and so did Allison. Together, years ago, we added one line most startups don't bother with. In cases where a founder's family member creates a conflict of interest that jeopardizes fiduciary or operational integrity, board rights may be subject to review. At the time, it was just legal padding, protection from hypothetical chaos. I never imagined I'd be using it against my former partner and my wife. But there we were. So what happens if we trigger it? I asked. Depends on how sloppy they've been, she said. If their relationship influenced business decisions, if company assets were misused, if access levels shifted without oversight. Basically, if Tom let his personal life leak into company operations. I let out a humorless laugh. Then he's been sloppy. She smirked. I assumed. We spent hours building a timeline, matching Abby's meetups to internal deadlines at Hampton Digital, comparing the dates she received new files, new access, new presentation material with the times Tom had overridden standard authorization, forwarding paths, shared drives, account logs. It was all there. He hadn't even tried to hide it. Do we pursue internal action or prepare for a board review? She asked. Both, I said. But no noise. Not yet. She nodded. A quiet takedown. Exactly. The beauty of corporate conflict is that it doesn't require shouting. It requires paperwork, precision, silence, a scalpel, not a hammer. By the afternoon, Allison had drafted a formal inquiry, one that would send a warning *T directly to the compliance team, the board chair, and Tom himself. Not an accusation, just a request for clarification. The corporate version of tapping someone on the shoulder before pulling the chair out from beneath them. Once this lands, she said, he'll scramble. He'll try to hide things. But every move he makes from this point on becomes evidence. And Abby? I asked. We leave her out of it for now. Your leverage isn't emotional, it's structural. I sat back, let that sink in, because she was right. This wasn't about winning her back, or punishing her, or even exposing her. This was about dismantling what she and Tom had built in the shadows. Not dramatically, not with explosions. Quietly, surgically. While she still believed I was lost in my own heartbreak, I was building a file thicker than the wedding album we never finished. That night, Abby asked if I wanted to watch something on TV. She tried for casual, but it came out stiff, like she was playing a role she hadn't rehearsed enough. I'm tired, I said. She nodded and looked relieved. Maybe she thought the distance was guilt. Maybe she thought I was withdrawing, retreating, making it easier for her to slip away cleanly. I let her think that. Over the next week, Allison and I worked like ghosts. No calls at home. No emails tied to my primary account. Everything encrypted. Everything off-site. Abby stayed busy. More meetups. More pitch calls. More late nights strategizing. Meanwhile, we gathered everything. Her messages with Tom, her unexplained access activity, the sudden shifts in file permissions, the travel reimbursements that didn't match company events, the time-stamped entries where he added her name to internal frameworks she had no business touching. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became. Their affair wasn't just personal. It was operational. He'd given her access to things the board would never have approved. Let her influence decisions behind the scenes. Used company property to support their little off-site romance. All of it left a trail. All of it pointed to misconduct. By the second week, we had a complete folder. Clean, organized, devastating. That's when Allison said, "He won't see this coming. He thinks you walked away. He thinks you're done." I know. I closed the folder. That's why it'll work. She paused. And Abby? What do you want for her? I didn't answer for a long moment. Finally, I said, I want her to see the cost of what she chose. Not revenge. Not retaliation. Just truth. Cold enough to burn. The day before the board meeting, I saw Abby standing in our kitchen, staring out the window like she was waiting for someone to arrive, or waiting for courage to knock. She turned when she heard me. Can we talk? She asked softly. Not yet. After tomorrow, I said. She didn't know what tomorrow was, but I did. Tomorrow was the day everything shifted. Tomorrow was the day Tom would walk into a room thinking he still owned the narrative. And tomorrow was the day he'd realize, I'd taken it back. All of it. Quietly. Completely. Irreversibly. The day of the board meeting arrived with a strange stillness. No chaos, no nerves. Just that sharp, silent kind of calm that comes before something irreversible. I wasn't invited, of course. Tom had made sure of that months ago, when he maneuvered to limit my presence to observer status. He probably thought he was cleaning up the last traces of me, that he'd sterilized the company of my influence. But influence isn't about where you sit. It's about what you hold. And I still held plenty. Allison had everything prepped. The folder was already on the table when the executives arrived, neutral cover, unassuming spine. Just another agenda item on the surface. But inside it was a scalpel. Precise. Clinical. Fatal to reputations built on arrogance. The email went out at 10:02 a.m. All board members. Executive leadership. Subject line. Request for independent review. Founder conduct and conflict disclosure. It landed the exact moment Tom stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the 19th floor of Hampton's HQ. I know because I'd timed it. Because I'd studied his calendar. Because I knew, without needing to be there, how predictable he was. He probably walked in with that signature grin, the one he used when he smelled opportunity. Probably tossed his phone onto the table like it was a mic drop, leaned back in the chair at the head of the table, and waited for the room to center on him. But this time, the room didn't center on him. Closed in. I was told later by one of the quieter board members, a guy I used to mentor, that Tom's face changed the moment he saw the file. He reached for it like it was nothing, opened it casually, read the first few pages, then stopped. His eyes darted across the table, searching for confirmation that this was a joke. It wasn't. Inside the folder was everything. The timeline, the internal activity logs, *TS of shared drives accessed by Abby under unauthorized credentials, date-stamped proof of travel expense reports submitted during her meetups, video stills of the drone footage, not salacious but damning in context, conflict of interest summaries, and finally, a signed advisory note from Allison, invoking Clause 14 of the original charter. That clause, the one about familial conflict, wasn't some technicality anymore. It was a noose, and Tom had tied the knot himself. The room fell silent. He tried to speak. That much I was told. Tried to explain that it was miscommunication, that Abby was just consulting, that there was no malicious intent. But words fall flat when the facts are printed, bound, and staring back at you. He asked where this had come from, who compiled it. No one answered, because the beauty of silence is that it doesn't need to justify itself. It just sits in the room until the truth is the only sound left. The board chair, a woman named Rachel who never liked Tom's smugness, asked a single question. Did you disclose this relationship to the compliance team? He hesitated, then shook his head. That was it. No outburst. No yelling. Just procedure. She turned to legal and requested a vote on temporary suspension pending full review. No one objected. Not one. They didn't need time to deliberate. They didn't need to circle back. They already knew. He crossed a line. And lines, once crossed, rarely get redrawn. The vote passed unanimously. And in that instant, Tom Bryson, the man who thought he owned every room he walked into, was officially removed from operational control. Suspended. Publicly, not yet. But internally, the shift was seismic. His access was revoked before he even left the table. When he returned to his office, his keycard blinked red. I got the confirmation message from Allison 30 minutes later. It's done. I didn't smile. Not out of pride. Not out of satisfaction. But because I finally understood something. Silence is louder than rage when it lands in the right moment. Tom had spent months posturing, peacocking around investors, partners, even Abby. He built his image around being the alpha, the charismatic disruptor, the founder who didn't follow rules because he thought he was the rule. But in the end, he was just another guy who underestimated the quiet ones. I stopped talking. He thought that meant I'd given up. But giving up is loud. Silence? Silence is what happens when the blade is already mid-swing. And Abby? She didn't hear it until later. I was in the living room that evening when she walked in. Heels in one hand, jacket draped over her arm, face flushed from what I assumed was another strategy session. She looked at me and paused. "What?" she asked, sensing something. I didn't say a word, just turned the TV off and stood. She looked at her phone, then back at me, confused, nervous. Then it buzzed. She glanced down, unlocked it. Her smile faded. It was a system notification from the company. Access revoked. She tried to log into her internal account. Denied. Tried her corporate card at the grocery store later that night. Declined. Tried to check her email. Password reset. She didn't ask me anything. Not right away. But I saw it, the realization creeping in. Tom was out. And whatever seat she thought she had in his new world, it vanished with him. When someone builds a castle on sand, you don't need to kick it down. You just wait for the tide. I didn't confront her. Didn't explain. Didn't offer a breakdown of the board vote or the clause or the file she never saw coming. I let the silence sit between us. Heavy. Unblinking. Because I wasn't here to gloat. I wasn't interested in her apologies. All I wanted was the moment to land. The moment where she realized that the world she'd traded me for didn't exist anymore. Not the way she thought. Not with him. And definitely not with me. She came home that evening like nothing had changed. Heels in hand, humming some tune, probably thinking she'd explain away the silence between us. But then her phone buzzed. She looked down, paused. Confusion. Then fear. Corporate access revoked. Bank card declined. Her world flickered. She turned to me, searching for a lifeline. I said nothing. Just slid the folder across the table, photos, messages, timestamps. She flipped through it, fingers trembling. Tried to speak. I raised a hand. "Not revenge," I said. "Just truth." Her eyes filled, voice cracking with excuses. I didn't listen. She thought stability meant safety. But stability built on lies was always going to collapse. I walked out before she could follow. Left her in a house that wasn't home anymore. In silence deep enough for her to finally hear herself. A week later, the press release went live. Leadership shift at Hampton Digital. My name was back on the board. Tom and Abby? Not mentioned. Clean, quiet, absolute. He disappeared. She stayed. Trapped in the shell of what used to be our life. One night, I saw her at a private dinner. Black dress, no makeup, eyes hollow. She walked toward me, asked if we could talk. I shook my head. No anger, just finality. She didn't get it. The game wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. What they tried to steal had been returned. And me? I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even angry. I was free. That chapter was over. The story moved on without her.